What happened in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing yesterday left Kamala Harris completely stunned. And it has already blown up across the internet as the moment everyone keeps replaying. When Senator John Kennedy, the sharp-minded Republican from Louisiana, asked her one simple legal question she couldn't answer, her reaction was unforgettable. What followed may change how Americans see this supposed legal heavyweight forever. Imagine Kamala Harris, the former vice president who built her image on legal expertise, sitting there red-faced and struggling as a seasoned senator calmly unraveled her with a question any law student could answer. The clip has already hit 38 million views in 12 hours, and #HarrisCan'tAnswer is trending nationwide. But the biggest shock was still to come. What Kennedy exposed next about Harris's weak grasp of the law left the whole room silent. Even her strongest Democratic allies unable to defend her. Before the full exchange unfolded, viewers were urged to like and subscribe so they wouldn't miss a second of the political drama. The clash truly began when Harris tried to control the hearing with her polished speech, unaware she was stepping into a trap prepared by a senator with years of legal sharpening behind him. This is how John Kennedy turned Kamala Harris into the center of national attention on live TV, and why many are calling it the political embarrassment of the year. The hearing room was packed with reporters, aides, and spectators waiting for a crucial discussion on criminal justice reform. The tension clear as cameras recorded every moment for a divided nation seeking answers. This wasn't an ordinary Capitol Hill session, but a major showdown over policies that could reshape justice in America. At the center were Senator John Kennedy, known for his charm and cutting questions, and Kamala Harris, the former vice president whose legal background was meant to give her authority. The stage was set to reveal the gap between polished rhetoric and real expertise. Kennedy sat calmly, known for questions that left experienced witnesses unsettled, focused not on showmanship, but on accountability. Across from him, Harris carried herself with the confidence of someone long in the public eye, relying on her years as prosecutor and attorney general to reinforce her credibility. Her presence was meant to support, reform, and persuade through her polished delivery. But Kennedy was ready to see whether her reputation truly matched her knowledge. The hearing opened with formalities before Harris launched into a passionate speech about systemic inequality, fair sentencing, and protecting the vulnerable. Her voice filled with conviction. Asterisk to her supporters, it was a demonstration of strong advocacy, mixing emotional appeals with mentions of her past as a prosecutor. Democratic senators nodded along happily, clearly impressed, while Republicans like Kennedy watched with calm skepticism. To an ordinary viewer, Harris appeared fully in control, her words carrying the authority that helped make her vice president. But Kennedy was not influenced by the performance. As he tapped his pen, he was already breaking down her speech, noticing the vague phrases and impressive-sounding buzzwords that lacked the depth needed for such a serious discussion. He saw a chance not to embarrass her, but to hold a public figure to the standards she claimed to represent. When question time began, Kennedy leaned forward and spoke in his steady Louisiana drawl, addressing her politely but firmly. He said she had talked a lot about reform and had an impressive record as a prosecutor. So he asked her to explain what mens rea means in criminal law and why it matters to the reforms she supports. The question hit hard, simple but powerful. Mens rea, the mental state needed to prove criminal intent, is a basic legal principle any prosecutor should know well. The room went silent as everyone watched Harris. Her confident smile faded and a brief hesitation appeared. She cleared her throat and began slowly. Saying mens rea was about a person's mindset and whether they meant to commit a crime. The answer sounded weak and basic for someone with her background. Reporters quickly began typing as the moment unfolded. Kennedy nodded slightly and asked her to explain how mens rea helps distinguish murder from manslaughter. saying people back home wanted clarity on fair justice. Harris paused longer this time and said murder was more deliberate while manslaughter was less intentional, like an accident. Though generally correct, the answer was vague and missed key details about malice and negligence. The room reacted quietly as her stumble became obvious. Kennedy stayed calm, and his steady questioning continued, revealing the gaps in her legal understanding. He then asked how Men's reconnects to the Fifth Amendment and due process, since she mentioned reforms. Harris looked uneasy and fumbled with her papers, saying the Fifth Amendment protects rights like against self-incrimination and mens rea is part of proving guilt. The reply sounded like a mix of phrases rather than a clear explanation, falling short of expectations for a former attorney general. Kennedy raised his eyebrows slightly and asked if she meant the Fifth Amendment required proving intent in every criminal case. His tone soft but firm. Harris hesitated, caught in a situation of her own creation. "Not always, but it's part of due process," she muttered, her confidence clearly collapsing. By this point, the room was buzzing with anticipation. Democratic senators shifted uneasily in their chairs, while Republicans tried to hide their amusement. Cameras zoomed in, catching Harris's flushed face and Kennedy's calm, steady stare. Social media quickly filled with clips of her shaky answers spreading rapidly online. The hashtag Harris can't answer began trending as viewers reacted to the dramatic scene unfolding before them. Kennedy, sensing the weight of the moment, stayed controlled but persistent. "Ms. Harris," he said with the voice of someone aware millions were watching, "these questions aren't just law school trivia. They're the very basics of the justice system you want to change. Don't Americans deserve to know that the people leading this effort actually understand the laws they're trying to reform?" His words lingered as Harris sat silently, her usual composure replaced by clear discomfort. Kennedy's style was a lesson in accountability, delivered quietly but powerfully. He wasn't yelling or performing, only asking questions any prosecutor should easily answer. Yet Harris, despite years in high-level legal roles, struggled to respond. The contrast stood out sharply. Kennedy's questions showed deep legal knowledge, while Harris's replies relied on broad ideas instead of detail. He continued by asking her to explain the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor in terms of legal consequences. Another basic question any law student would know. Harris attempted to change the topic to fair sentencing, but Kennedy gently redirected her, asking specifically about penalties and constitutional protections. Her answer was a mix of vague comments about jail and fines, leaving out key points like felonies bringing harsher punishment and loss of rights, while misdemeanors carry lighter consequences. The room filled with quiet tension as Democratic staffers looked worried and reporters rapidly documented every exchange. Cameras caught everything, from the color in Harris's face to the quiet confidence in Kennedy's body language and the subtle smiles of Republican senators. This wasn't just a discussion about policy, but a test of credibility, and Kennedy clearly controlled the moment. When the session broke, the atmosphere was intense. Journalists rushed to publish stories, knowing this would dominate headlines, while social media exploded with clips of Kennedy's questions gaining thousands of views. Many posts said Kennedy had given her a legal pop quiz that she failed, while others claimed this is what happens when someone meets a person who truly understands the law. It became a viral moment, but more importantly, it highlighted that in serious policy debates, especially about justice reform, knowledge matters more than charm. Kennedy had entered not as a performer, but as a senator demanding accountability, and in doing so, revealed a weakness in Harris's image that speeches alone couldn't hide. The confrontation was only beginning, and the nation watched every second. Chapter 2. The pressure builds and the room explodes. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing had already shifted dramatically. But what followed turned the atmosphere volatile as Senator John Kennedy increased the pressure on Kamala Harris. leaving her unsettled and the internet in chaos. The viral moment where Harris struggled to explain mens rea had only been the start. Now Kennedy was prepared to push further, using his deep legal knowledge to reveal flaws in Harris's claimed expertise. The former vice president, who had built her career on her prosecutorial background, was clearly shaken, her polished image fading under Kennedy's steady and courteous questioning. The atmosphere in the room felt like a pressure cooker, with senators leaning in, reporters typing rapidly, and cameras recording every small reaction. As Kennedy dug further into the basic legal framework of criminal justice reform, Harris's answers became more uncertain, each stumble increasing the impression that she was beyond her depth. By the end of this exchange, the hashtag #HarrisCan'tAnswer was racing up social media trends, and the country was witnessing a powerful display of accountability that people would keep replaying for days. This was no longer just a routine hearing. It had become a public reckoning, and Kennedy was directing it with sharp precision. The short recess hardly eased the tension. If anything, the pause only heightened the suspense as senators' aides and journalists whispered intensely about what had just unfolded. Harris, clearly shaken, took sips of water and shuffled through her papers, trying to steady herself. Her team gathered close, sharing brief encouragement, though the concern on their faces couldn't be hidden. Across from them, Kennedy sat quietly, his face unreadable, but his relaxed posture resembling a chess player confident that checkmate was already set up. The Louisiana senator wasn't there to score easy political wins. His purpose was to make sure Americans could trust the officials shaping their justice system. When the hearing resumed, the chairman restored order, but the atmosphere remained charged. Every eye stayed fixed on Kennedy and Harris, waiting for the next turn in this high-stakes confrontation. Kennedy leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady and colored with his familiar Southern tone, making even tough questions sound simple. "Ms. Harris," he began, thanking her for her earlier replies before suggesting they look a little deeper since she was helping guide this reform effort. He then asked her to explain the difference between beyond a reasonable doubt and preponderance of the evidence, two core legal standards. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the demanding level of proof for criminal cases, while preponderance of the evidence is the lower threshold for civil cases, meaning something is more likely than not. With Harris's experience, this should have been effortless. But as the silence stretched, her hesitation became obvious. She finally answered that both were proof standards, saying beyond a reasonable doubt ensured guilt in criminal cases, and preponderance was used in civil matters to judge what was more likely. The reply was technically right, but lacked the confidence and detail expected from a former attorney general. She didn't explain their full impact on the system, leaving her comments incomplete. Kennedy lifted his eyebrows slightly, showing polite doubt, and gently asked how these standards connected to the reforms she supported, such as their effect on prosecutorial discretion. Harris shifted uncomfortably, fidgeting with her pen, and replied that discretion involved weighing the evidence, saying criminal cases needed stronger proof and civil ones required less. The answer avoided the deeper issues of how those standards shaped charging choices or plea deals, which were central to the discussion. The room reacted quietly, with Democrats trading uneasy looks and Republicans struggling not to smile. Kennedy didn't attack. Instead, he leaned back calmly and paused before continuing. So, when you're advocating changes to how prosecutors operate, are you suggesting the standard of proof should shift in some situations? Or is it more about how prosecutors apply it? The question was carefully crafted to force Harris to explain her stance with details she clearly wasn't ready to give. Her reply was shaky, filled with broad statements and attempts to steer away. "It's about fairness," she said, trying to move to safer ground, insisting prosecutors should use discretion so the system doesn't unfairly target certain groups. It sounded like a talking point rather than a real answer, and everyone in the room sensed it. Kennedy's eyes reflected the calm satisfaction of someone who had landed a solid point without raising his voice. "Fairness matters," he said with a nod, "but I'm asking about the legal mechanics." "Ms. Harris, if we're changing the system, shouldn't we be clear on how these standards affect the outcomes you're describing?" The question lingered unanswered as Harris's face reddened with frustration. Cameras zoomed in, recording every uncomfortable second, while reporters typed non-stop. Aware they were witnessing a moment sure to dominate headlines. Seeing the opportunity, Kennedy shifted to another essential topic, still calm, but with authority in his tone. "Let's try something else," he said. "The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to a fair trial, which you mentioned earlier. Can you explain what specific protections it includes and how they connect to the reforms you're promoting?" The Sixth Amendment covers fundamental rights such as a speedy trial, an impartial jury, and legal representation. For a former prosecutor, it should have been easy. But Harris spoke hesitantly, her words tripping over each other. Saying the amendment ensured fair process, like having a lawyer and a trial not dragged out too long. The answer was weak, missing crucial elements like confronting witnesses or the right to a public trial. Details any experienced lawyer would instantly know. A low murmur spread through the room as everyone absorbed the scale of her stumble. Democratic allies tried to stay composed, but their discomfort was obvious. While Republicans struggled to hide smiles, one whispering that she was sinking fast. Kennedy, still polite, leaned forward and gently asked whether these protections were the foundation of the justice system and if fully understanding them wasn't essential when changing how trials work. The question sounded simple, but highlighted her inability to clearly explain. A core constitutional principle tied to her reform agenda. Her vague references to fairness and due process only made things worse. By then, social media was exploding, with clips of her uncertain answers spreading rapidly and the hashtag #HarrisCan'tAnswer climbing to the top of trending lists. Tweets mocked the exchange, noting how Kennedy asked about the Sixth Amendment and she faltered, while memes showed her confused expression beside lines suggesting the Louisiana senator understood the law better. The online reaction was harsh, but it was Kennedy's calm, steady questioning that defined the moment. He didn't shout or accuse her. He simply asked questions any lawyer, especially a former attorney general, should easily answer. The contrast was striking. Kennedy showed command of legal principles, while Harris relied on vague language that left her exposed. As the exchange went on, his strategy became obvious. He wasn't just challenging her policy arguments, but her credibility as a legal expert. He shifted to a real-world scenario from his work as a senator, saying that people in Louisiana wanted to know their rights were secure when facing charges and asking how the burden of proof, like beyond a reasonable doubt, influenced a prosecutor's decision to move forward. The question was practical and directly tied to the system Harris said she wanted to reform. But again, her answer faltered, filled with general comments about fairness and equity that didn't address the actual legal process. Kennedy nodded calmly, his expression neutral but his gaze sharp, saying he understood her point about fairness. But his question was about the law itself. How does the burden of proof guide a prosecutor's choice to charge or not? Harris's silence spoke louder than any answer could. And the room turned into a cauldron of tension as every senator, staffer, and reporter waited for Kennedy's next move. He didn't disappoint. "Let's make it simpler," he said, with a hint of mischief in his voice. "Can you tell us what the term voir dire means in the context of a trial?" It was another basic question, since voir dire refers to the jury selection process. Something Harris would have dealt with countless times as a prosecutor, but her response was another disaster. A vague mumble about picking a jury that missed the legal significance of the term. The room filled with gasps and whispers as even Democratic senators struggled to hide their shock. Kennedy stayed composed and simply nodded. "That's part of it," he said, but it's also about ensuring the jury's impartial, right? That's a Sixth Amendment issue, isn't it? The question was a knockout punch, tying his earlier point about constitutional protections to Harris's latest stumble. As the session neared its conclusion, the damage was clear. Harris's credibility was in ruins, and Kennedy's calm, methodical approach had turned the hearing into a test of expertise. Social media exploded with clips of the exchange hitting millions of views. One viral video showed Harris's flustered face as Kennedy asked about voir dire, captioned, "When you realize you're not ready for the pop quiz?" Legal analysts on Twitter began weighing in, with one prominent attorney tweeting that Kennedy's questions were law school basics and Harris's inability to answer was shocking for someone with her resume. The hashtag Harris Can't Answer was now a global trend, and memes flooded every platform. But beyond the online frenzy, there was a deeper point. Kennedy had revealed a basic truth about leadership in public policy. That passion and charisma are no replacement for knowledge. And the American people deserve leaders who can back up their rhetoric with substance. As the chairman called a break, the room buzzed with energy. Reporters rushed to file their stories, knowing this was the kind of moment that defines a news cycle. Democratic staffers huddled to plan a recovery strategy for Harris, while Republicans exchanged knowing glances, aware that Kennedy had just given a masterclass in accountability. The cameras lingered on Harris, her face a mixture of frustration and resignation, and on Kennedy, whose calm never wavered. This was more than a political win. It was a lesson in the power of preparation and expertise. Kennedy had entered the hearing with one goal: to make sure the American people could trust the leaders shaping their laws. In just a few minutes, he showed the nation what happens when rhetoric meets reality. The stage was set for the next act, and the country watched, captivated by a showdown that was far from finished. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing had become a full-blown spectacle. And as Senator John Kennedy continued his surgical dismantling of Kamala Harris's legal credentials, the fallout was seismic. Harris, still shaken from her earlier stumbles, was clearly struggling to recover. But Kennedy's sharp, calm questions left her with nowhere to turn. The former vice president's polished image was unraveling in front of senators, reporters, and cameras, each misstep reinforcing the perception that she was out of her depth. Social media stayed ablaze with clips of her faltering responses. And hashtag Harris Cantor was now a nationwide phenomenon trending at the top of every platform. Asterisk Kennedy, with his unassuming Louisiana drawl and razor-sharp intellect, wasn't just winning a debate. He was exposing a critical gap between Harris's rhetoric and her actual expertise. This was no longer just a hearing. It was a public reckoning, and the nation was glued to every second. As the session resumed, the tension in the room was palpable. Harris, her confidence shaken, tried to project composure, but her fidgeting hands and forced smile betrayed her unease. Kennedy, sitting calmly at his desk, exuded the quiet confidence of someone who knew the power of his questions. He wasn't there to grandstand. His mission was to ensure that those leading the charge on criminal justice reform could back up their claims with substance. Leaning into the microphone, he spoke with that familiar Southern charm. "Ms. Harris," he said, "you've talked a lot about fairness in the justice system, so let's get specific. Can you explain what a Brady violation is and why it matters for the reforms you're pushing?" The question was a legal soft pitch. A Brady violation occurs when prosecutors withhold exculpatory evidence, undermining a defendant's right to a fair trial. For a former prosecutor, this should have been an easy win. Harris hesitated, her eyes darting to her notes. "Well, Senator," she began, her voice unsteady. "A Brady violation is when prosecutors don't share evidence that could help the defense." The answer was technically correct, but lacked depth. Missing the violation's constitutional roots in due process and its impact on case integrity. Kennedy tilted his head, his expression politely curious. "That's a start, ma'am," he said. "But can you tell us how it ties to the Fifth Amendment and what it means for prosecutorial accountability?" The room went silent, all eyes on Harris. Her response was a vague mumble about ensuring fairness, sidestepping the constitutional connection and the violation's role in preventing miscarriages of justice. Reporters typed furiously as whispers filled the room and senators exchanged glances. Kennedy didn't let up. "Let's try another one," he said, still calm but unrelenting. "You've mentioned prosecutorial misconduct as a key issue. Can you explain what constitutes a motion to suppress and how it relates to the Fourth Amendment?" The question was another fundamental one. A motion to suppress seeks to exclude illegally obtained evidence, often tied to Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches. Harris's face tightened and she stumbled through a response about keeping trials fair that failed to address the legal mechanics. The room erupted in murmurs, with Democratic senators shifting uncomfortably and Republicans barely hiding their amusement. Kennedy's questions weren't complex. They were the building blocks of the justice system, and Harris's inability to answer them was glaring. Social media exploded with #Harris trending globally. Clips of her latest stumbles were shared thousands of times, one hitting 500,000 views in minutes. A viral tweet read, "Kennedy's asking law school 101 questions and Harris is flunking in front of the nation." Another meme showed her flustered expression with the caption, "When you realize the senator from Louisiana is schooling you." Legal analysts on X weighed in, with one attorney noting Harris's responses were shockingly vague for someone with her experience. The public reaction was a mix of shock and glee as Kennedy's calm, knowledgeable approach turned him into an unlikely hero for those who valued substance over style. Harris tried to pivot into a speech about systemic inequities, but Kennedy gently reeled her back. "I hear you on fairness, Ms. Harris," he said, "but I'm asking about the law. How do these rules shape the reforms you're proposing?" Her silence was deafening, and the cameras captured every second of her discomfort. Democratic allies tried to intervene, with one senator objecting that Kennedy's questions were too technical, but he brushed it off with a smile. "I'm just asking about the law, Senator. If we're reforming justice, shouldn't we know what we're talking about?" The room was electric, with reporters live tweeting every exchange and the internet buzzing with reactions. As the session ended, the fallout was immediate. Asterisk news outlets ran headlines like "Kennedy exposes Harris's legal gaps" and "Former VP stumbles in Senate clash." Cable networks replayed the clips with analysts noting the stark contrast between Kennedy's precision and Harris's vagueness. Even some progressive commentators admitted she'd been unprepared. "Those were basic questions," one MSNBC analyst said. "She should have been ready." The nation was watching, and Kennedy had proven that in the arena of public policy expertise matters more than charisma. The stage was set for a final reckoning, and the country was captivated by a showdown that was reshaping the conversation around leadership and accountability. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing had transformed into a cultural and political earthquake, with Senator John Kennedy's masterful questioning of Kamala Harris leaving an indelible mark on the national conversation. Harris, once seen as an unassailable legal authority, was left reeling. Her inability to answer basic legal questions exposed before a rapt audience of senators, reporters, and millions watching online. The viral clips of her stumbles had ignited a firestorm, with "Harris can't answer" trending globally and the internet buzzing with memes and commentary. But this wasn't just a fleeting moment of political theater. It was a seismic shift that underscored the power of authentic expertise and the consequences of claiming authority without substance. Kennedy's calm, incisive approach had not only dismantled Harris's credibility, but also sparked a broader dialogue about what Americans should demand from their leaders. The lessons from this clash would resonate far beyond the hearing room. offering a powerful reminder that in the arena of public policy, knowledge is the ultimate currency and accountability is non-negotiable. As the hearing concluded, the fallout was immediate and relentless. Newsrooms across the country scrambled to cover the story with headlines like Kennedy School's Harris in Senate showdown and former VP's legal stumbles go viral, dominating the cycle. Cable networks looped the clips of Harris's faltering responses with legal analysts dissecting her every word. One MSNBC commentator, usually a Harris supporter, admitted those were basic questions. She should have been prepared. On X, the reaction was even more intense, with the hashtag #HarrisCan'tAnswer climbing to the top global trend within hours. A viral video of Harris fumbling the Brady violation question racked up 6 million views, while a meme of her flustered expression captioned when the senator from Louisiana gives you a law school pop quiz spread like wildfire. Legal professionals piled on, with a prominent defense attorney tweeting, "Kennedy's questions were straight out of a first-year law textbook. Harris's failure to answer is shocking for a former ag." Harris's team went into crisis mode, issuing statements emphasizing her broader vision for justice reform, but the damage was done. Her inability to articulate fundamental legal concepts had raised serious questions about her qualifications to lead such a complex conversation. Democratic allies tried to spin the narrative, with one senator claiming Kennedy's questions were unfairly technical. But the public wasn't buying it. The contrast was too stark. Kennedy, with his folksy charm and deep legal knowledge, had exposed Harris's reliance on vague talking points, and the nation was watching. Asterisk. Meanwhile, Kennedy emerged as an unlikely hero, praised for his restraint and precision. He didn't gloat or grandstand. His quiet confidence and command of the law spoke for themselves, earning him respect from those who valued substance over style. The impact stretched far beyond the news cycle. Law schools began adding the exchange to their curricula, using it as a case study in the difference between true expertise and political performance. A Georgetown law professor remarked that Kennedy demonstrated how to hold power accountable with nothing but knowledge and preparation. Young lawyers and law students pointed to the moment as inspiration, with one viral TikTok showing a first-year student answering Kennedy's questions correctly, captioned, "If I can do it, why couldn't she?" Civic organizations invited Kennedy to speak at events where he stressed the importance of understanding the law when shaping policy. His message resonated that leaders must be held to the same standards of competence as professionals in any other field, whether medicine, engineering, or law. Kennedy's exchange with Harris became a cultural turning point, exposing the danger of charisma without substance and reminding the public to demand real expertise from leaders. The viral hashtag #HarrisCan'tAnswer grew into a movement applying the Kennedy test to other figures, with business schools even teaching it as a lesson in authentic leadership. For Kennedy, it cemented his image as a champion of accountability. For Harris, it was a sobering reminder that empty confidence eventually collapses. The moment proved that in public policy, truth and knowledge always prevail over theatrics.